Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're going to Masechtas Nazir daf Nun Beis. We are going to begin on the bottom of Nun Aleph Amid Beis, the third line from the bottom. So the Gemara asks, Boy Rava, Nimla Shechasr Mahu. If we're dealing with an ant that is missing a limb, what is the status regarding it becoming, making someone tameh in that regard? So on this Taisa says, Ha'oichel nimalu, we know if a person eats an ant, chayiv aleha b'chol shehu. You're chayiv even if it's the smallest ant, because the din is, since it's a baria, since it is a complete creation, even if it's very small, the din is you're still going to be chayiv. Avli b'she'ein b'kazayis, doesn't have to be that amount. Boile im niktsu ragleha, if let's say one of the legs came off, shedayin hi yachayil l'chayos, and it's still able to live, yadayin shem beria leha, does it still have the name of a beria on it? So that is the question regarding this ant. So why? So if you look in the Mefarish says kol shehu, even if let's say it's a small amount, but when you eat it, mahu, what's the din? Shir nemola shlema gemirila, does it have to be complete? Dechi achol chayev, that when you ate it you're chayev. The il heicha de chasra havi pater, but if it's missing then you're pater. Il dilma beria gemirila, it's a beria. Dechi achol beri mechayev, when you eat it as a beri mechayev. Dechi chasra nami chayev, but if it's missing a limb you're still going to be chayev. Deha'ika beria barminan ruba kukulo. Do we say by an ant ruba kukulo? And this the Rosh explains, dafka by an ant. If you look on Nun Beis Amud Aleph, it says avol heicha de nafla beneshama kagoin nemoa chaya chashuva beria fil chasra hoyle ve'adayin yuchal chayos. So an ant, even if it's missing one of its legs, is still capable of living. So it's not an Indian of tumah, but the kasha is, when a person is chayiv for eating a beria, what if it's missing one of its legs? Is that considered to be a beria? Says the Gemara, shiura gamrinan la. Do we say that we look at the shiur and v'hachaser and it's missing the amount to be chayiv? Because the part of a sheretz, if you don't have a full sheretz, so it's only part, then it's only going to be chayiv, it's only going to be matama ka'adosha. So therefore, maybe since it doesn't have that shear to be matama kadasha or to eat it as a kazayas, so therefore not chayiv. Or beria gemirila beika, or do we say that we learn it like a beria and therefore it's considered like a beria because it's still able to live? Says Taisus, Kleimer shlema beberia. Maybe it's considered to be like a shlema. Is only when you're chayiv. But hachasra, it is missing. Odilma beri gemirila v'havila sheretz hoyel v'adayin ruis l'chayos. So what constitutes it being a beria? Maybe it's only the fact that it's still able to live. So the fact is an ant missing a limb is still able to survive. So maybe it's still considered to be a beria, and therefore you're going to be chayiv even if it's pachas mashir. That's the question. Beria gemirila ba'ika. So on this, as we continue to Nun Beis Amud Aleph, Amar Yehuda diskarta Tashma, he says, coming here from the following. If we look in the pasuk, it says Bahem. So the entirety of the pasuk is Eila haTameim lachem. These things are tamei. Mikol hasharetz, anything which is a crawling item. Kol hanogeh behem b'moisim yitma. If you touch a sheretz while it's dead, you become tamei. Ada arev. So the din is that you are tamei until the evening. So that's what we went out from the pasuk Bahem, that if you touch a sheretz, you're tamei. Yachol b'kulon. You would think that's only if you touch it entirely. Talmud mayhem, even if you touch part of it. So mayhem yachol miksasan. Maybe you only touch part of it. Talmud bahem. So haketzad. Are you going to be tamei if you touch only part of it, or only if you touch the whole thing? So ad shiyaga miksasan shukakulon. It's only until part of it is kikulon, which v'shir chachamim b'kadasha. Says the Mefarish, Shemaga Adasha Yatama Shu Kadasha Sheshava Kakulo. So the din is that if the item which is missing, it's chaser, but it's still large enough that it's the size of a kadasha, so on that we say even mayhem you're still going to be chayiv. So we see that this is the din. that when it comes to something which is the size of a kadasha, you'll be matama b'maga. Shechein hachaymet techilas biryaso b'kadasha. When it comes to a chaymet, when it was first created, it's the size of a kadasha, of a lentil seed. So shema mina she'ira gimirila. So we see it's totally on the measurement, and therefore it's missing. So therefore, this is a raya that will not be matama, or that a person will not be chayiv. Says the Mefarish. So he says, B'shiru chachamim shemaga dasha yatama shehu kadasha sheshav kakul shechein hachaymet umidikaboy shir beria kadasha. Since we say that the measurement is a kadasha, is a lentil, shemamina shiiru de beria kula b'inan. It needs to be a complete item. The chasra shiura, if it's missing, then shira nafkala machlal tumasa, then it's going to be removed. It's tuma. So it's not just regarding becoming tameh; it's also it's also regarding achila as the same din. So we see from here raya that a chaymet, when it's created, it can't be created unless it's the size of a kadasha. But here it's an ant that lost its leg, so therefore it's not going to be matama. So Amar Shamia, no kibi inan shira. When do we need that? Has to be kadasha. Dibidiloi havi kadasha. Lo matama the lo naful the lo nafsha naful neshama. Of a naful neshama lo tiboyloch. So it makes a distinction whether or not we're talking about something which was already created or has not yet been created. Says the Mefarish, B'midi d'chol b'riyasa b'kadasha of a gabi nemoa. When it comes to an ant, b'pachos b'kadasha havi ba neshama. Even less than that measurement, it's still alive. D'ashlema nami lo havi kula kadasha. Even if you have an ant that's complete, it's not that size of a kadasha. So b'inan shira. Maybe you don't need that measurement, even if it's missing a leg. And therefore it's still a question. So an ant itself, even if it's in its complete state, is not the size of a kadasha. So therefore it's not a raya. Okay, let's look at question 4. Let's see how we address this. So nemola shechasr mahu. If you have an ant that's missing a limb, what's it did? How do we try to answer it, and how do we end up saying it's not? So Ratza Lishait, we don't want to answer this, says the question 4, Mishir Ka'adasha, Dahainu Ketchilas Beryoso Shal Chaymet. The beginning of the creation of this creature called a Chaymet is the size of a lentil. Now, if it would be true that if even it was missing something, that shem beria allowed, that would still be considered to be a beria. So nishkachas la toma pachas makadasha. Then you would find that it would even be matama pachas makadasha. So, and we see that the chaymet is the size of a kadasha, which is mashma. If it's smaller than that, it won't work. So we say it's all totally on a specific measurement, and therefore also when it comes to an ant, if it's missing a limb, then it's not going to be matama, or you're not going to be chai for eating it. But dachu, the shiny hustle, maybe it's different by a chaymet. The lo naflo ba neshama, because it didn't live yet. It was just born. But an ant that already lived, the question is, if it lost a limb and it was already alive, so maybe the din is different. Okay, so that's how he explains it. So we don't have an answer to that question. Now the Gemara is going to ask a different point. That the Mishnah said that if a Nazir comes in contact with hashedra, with the spinal column of a mace, or a golgoilus, or the skull of a mace, then he's going to be tameh, and he'll have to be goleach, etc. So the Gemara wonders, what is the vav? So he boilahu. He asks the question, shedra golgoilus hanan, o dilma o shedra o golgoilus. The question is, in order to become tameh, is it that each one exclusively can be matama, or is it only when you have the golgoilus, the skull, together with the shedra? So Omer Rav Tashma. So shedra shigired, if you have a skull that was broken off, rov ilain shaba tahira, and the ribs which form the spine are there, are with it, so it's tahar. Uvekever feel mishuberes. When it comes to in the actual kever, the cemetery, a grave, a feel mishuberes, even if it's broken, or miforekes, or it's detached, still tameim. And hakever mipnei kever. So we're more strict when it comes to the kever, that the din is that it's going to be matama. Why? Says the Mefarish, mipnei shekever misrapel yus kamo shlema. The fact that it's in a kever, it's like it all combines together. Halo gired Tameya. However, if let's say it was not broken off, it would be Tamei v'afin of the Leka Golgoylas v'hada, even if there was no skull together with it. Mishmamin of the Shedro Golgolas Tanan. So that's what the Gemara. This is going to be the Gemara's raya. So he says like this: Taima mishom degirid. It's only because it broke off. The Shedra broke off. Halo girid. But let's say the spinal column didn't break off. Tamei. Shemamina o shedra o golgolas katani. It doesn't require that the shedra should be together with the golgolas. It's only not tamei because it was girid, because it broke off. However, if it didn't break off, the din is that you would be matamo just by the shedra alone. So when it says halo katani lo kamash malon the chi girid tahira idach ti boilach. So halo katani, it doesn't say that. Kamash malon the chi girid tahira. It doesn't. However, if let's say it broke off, it's tahara. Idach ti boilach. The other way around, if lo girid, if it did not break off, we still don't know the answer. You know, you can't make that diuk. Maybe it's only because it broke off it's considered to be tahar. However, we don't know necessarily that that would be the same din if it didn't break off, that it would be matama. Maybe it's still tahar. So we don't really know on the other side. So again, we didn't answer the question if you need both. There's 6 things which we're going to see soon, in which there was a machlokas between Rabbi Kiva and the Chachamim whether it's tamei or tahar. Rabbi Kiva, and Rabbi Kiva retracted on these statements, or at least some of them. Umar said there's a story shehaviu kupa moyat samais, that there was like a basket filled with bones that were brought with Beis Shel Tarsim, which was brought to this place where the coppersmiths were. Some say it was in a particular nation. Okay. V'hinichua ba'avir, says the Mefarish, they put it in the air. They didn't want to become tummy by these bones. V'nichnas tudus harayfe. So tudus, the doctor who was an expert and a knowledge in all these different things, says the Mefarish, he was an expert imhein memes echad mishnei mesim. He was able to decipher if these different parts, these different bones came from one body or multiple bodies. So nichlas tudus harayfe v'chol harayfe mimo, and all doctors with him. Yomer ein kan shedra memes echad. We don't find a shedra from one mace. Says the Mefarish, ein hanazir galeach al ahiloi. And therefore, if a Nazir was in the same proximity of these bones, he's not going to be matama. Even according to Rabbi Kiva, who says that it comes from multiple mesim, we're going to see the Rabbi Kiva retracted. So Taima says the Gemara delay shedra. The only reason why it's not matama is because there's not one shedra, the mechada ha'ika. The mechada, we don't find that's from one person. Ha'iko shedro gogoylas the mechada nazir megalecho shemamino shedro gogoylas tanan. So the whole reason is because he said that we didn't find that the shedra belonged to only one person; it was multiple people, and therefore it's a combination of different parts of a shedra together. That's not going to be mitzaref. It's not going to be matama. Which is mashma. If you had a shedra alone, just the spinal column of one mace, that would be matama, the nazir. So we see from here that the shedra alone is matama. Whereas this lo meboy kamer, lo meboy shedra v'gogoylis dimames echad leika. He was saying that it's not coming from a shedra or and a gogoylis of one mace. He's saying there isn't even one shedra of or golgolas of one mace. In other words, it doesn't mean what he was saying was halachically talking about. Therefore, we can deduce that if there was a shedra of one mace, then it would be matama. No, he's just saying that this is certainly not something which is going to be matama ba'oil, because not only is it not just a shedder from one, which may in itself not be enough, but the shedders came from multiple people. Tashma. So therefore, again, it's not a raya. Tashma. So the Gemara says, Miminyana, when we count those 6 things, umahin shishnavar. So what is it? Rabbi Kiva matava chacham matar. So this is the list. Al Abram and Ameis shabam mishnei mesim. So according to Rabbi Kiva, he originally said it's Tanei, that if you have an aver, a limb from a dead body, which came from 2 different mesim, so is that going to be matama? So he originally said yes, but then he was chayzer. Val aver menachai shabam mishnei b'nei adam. If you have an aver menachai, which is like a living amputated limb from a living person that actually came from 2 people, val chatzi kavat samais, half a kav of bones, Shibam Mishnei Mason, it came from 2. So all these different things, originally Rabbi Kiva thought that they do combine, and it is matama, even if it's not just 1. So he says, no, it doesn't combine, like the Chachamim. Revius dam haba mishnayim. Also, when it comes to revius of blood, but it's not one mace's blood, but it's combined. Or if you have a bone which is the size of a barley seed, which is normally matamba b'magma masa, but was split into 2. But so therefore the question, it's almost like 2 mason, but over here it's like 2 split in 2. So really together is kasaira as a barley seed, but since they're split, so it's not matamba. But shedder and gogoilus, and over here it says shedder and gogoilus, which sounds like we are going to be including both of them together. That it's only Rabbi Kiva originally thought it's with both of them together, and therefore nonetheless he still retracts. So as we continue to Nun Beis and Beis, now if you want to tell me that it's or the spinal column or the backbone or the skull, so hani shiva havin. So if we would split those into 2, so that ends up becoming 7 categories. So it's a raya that the shedron and golgoylis is combined, and that's when the din is that's matam. Even though Rabbi Kiva ends up being chayzer, we'll see. So the Gemara says no. Kikatani simin yachid shehu gilach leachad kol heicha depli gileha rabim. Anytime in which Rabbi Kiva argues with the rabim, lafuki etzim kasara di yachid hu depol gileha. However, we're going to remove the case of etzim kasara if the bone is the size of a barley seed and it was split, because Rabbi Kiva doesn't argue over there with Chachamim, but rather he argues with another Yachid. So because that's not consistent with the other cases, so we'll remove that, which means possibly the case of Sheder and Gogoylis are 2 separate situations. If you have a bone which size the barley seed but split to 2, Rabbi Kiva matam Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri matahar. So that's one answer. One answer is that we remove that case. Answer number 2, we only mention the case of an Abram and a mace, but not a limb from living people, amputated limbs. Because we're only talking about mason. A third answer, Kikatani kol heicha de nazir megaleach al ahiloi. We only want to mention cases in which there's also tuma, not just magma mas, but also ba'oil. Now that's lafuke, etzim kasara delo, because we know again etzim kasara, the din is it's too small to be matama ba'oil. To be matama ba'oil, you have to have robinyan. So over here we're talking about the golgoyos and the shedra, but certainly an etzim kasara is not matama ba'oil. So we don't want to include that case because these are cases where it'd be matama ba'oil. The saying a fourth answer, kikatani kol heicha dehaderbe. We only want to mention cases where Rabbi Kiva retracted. Lafuk revius dam deloi haderbe. We're going to remove the case of revius dam of 2 basim because Rabbi Kiva was not chayzer. He actually still holds that that's the din. That the din is that if you have blood from 2 different people, it does combine to revius matama. Where do we see that? We saw this actually before. Yermele Rebbe lebar kapara lo tishan revius dam bechazara. We do not learn that Rabbi Kiva retracted on the case of mace, the 2 bodies' bloods, which combine to Rabbi Dam. Rabbi Kiva because he has a limit from the psukim. The oid hamikra messiah, he has a pasuk to support him. As we mentioned, it says nefashos, which is talking about the bloods, nefesh kidamhu nefesh. This is nefashos, which is bloods of a mace. So why does it mention it as rabim to a yachid? So Rabbi Akiva learns out from here, it's coming to tell us this din, that it's still going to be matama, even if it comes from nefashos, even if it comes from multiple bodies combined to the bloods. So for the multiple answers we're giving, the same point is what is being established. That we don't necessarily want to say that Golgoylos and Shedra are considered to be like one case, and therefore, that's why it has to be that it's one, because otherwise there'll be 7 and not 6 cases. No, we'll just remove one of the cases, and then Shedra and Golgoylos could be 2 separate situations. Question 5. These are the questions that were not answered. So we're in the middle of discussing this board. It's going to be boy the lifshita, whether or not the shedra and golgoylas is together or it's o tanan. They're separate. And the second one, which we'll see later on. Let's look at question 6. There's 6 things, and it gives the whole list. Abram and Achai, Mishnei B'nei Adam, Abram and Ames, Chatzi Kavat Samis, Revius Dam, Shedra Gagos, Mishnei Mesim, Etzem Kasar and Shenechlo. So Al Eis Mehem, Ein HaNazir Megalech Al Ahaloi. Which one does the Nazir not Megalech? And that's on Sa'ira, Ketzem Kasara. The Eis Mehem Lo Had Rabbi Akiva Chachamim regarding the Dam of, Revius Dam of Shnei Mesim. Okay, so that's clear. We'll get back, we'll finish up question 5 soon. So again, we still don't know the answer to whether or not we can include Shedra and Golgoylos, or they're separate. Okay. Rosh Shimon says, Ad Yomov Haimatama. So let me just see over here. Is that possible? Let's see where he's quoting this from. Okay. Ad Yomov Haimatama Im Mishemes Chazbo En Yodea. So this is going on to Rabbi Akiva. He said, Ad Yomov, until the life of Rabbi Akiva Ha'yuz Matama. Im Mishemes Chazbo En Yodea. If when he died, if he was Chayzer, I don't know. Tana Hushchuru Shinav. It says that his teeth literally became blackened because of fasting. What is that? What's talking about? So if you look in the Mafarish, Ad Yamav, Kalemer Koyamav Hayamatama Rabbi Kiva V'Shema Mishemes Chazubai. So all our time when Rabbi Kiva was alive, we say it was Tommy, but maybe afterwards we retracted. So his teeth became blackened, Reb Shimon's Tani Sav, because of fasting. Says the Mefarish Lafi, Sheder Kenai Hoya, Mishtoya Lehad Rabbi Akiva, Oimer Im Mishemes Chazerboy. The fact the way he spoke was a little bit of a Genai about Rabbi Akiva, so therefore he was fasting excessively. If we look in Taisvis, it says, Tani Yaisav Mepnei She'ein Derech Eretz L'daber Al Rabba Blushan Zeh. It's not proper to speak about your teacher this way. Yoshev Misana Yomim Rabim. And therefore he sat and fasted for many, many days. Okay. So again, it shows the greatness that even the slightest little mistake of speaking disrespectfully, they took their words extremely seriously. Toshma, Desanya, Beishami Omrim. So Beishami says, Roiva Atsamois. If you have this Roiva Atsamois, this measurement of bones, Min Hatsamim, from bones, O Mishnayim, or either from one bone, O Mishnayim, or from 2 bones, O Mishloish, or from 3 bones. So it's possible you can have very large bones and it will equal this measurement. And by that alone will be matama ba'oil. So much so that the person will end up having to be sprinkled on the 3rd and 7th day, etc. Even if it comes from 2 or 3 bones, of a lob etzem echad, rather, but not from 1 bone. It has to be 2 or 3. It's only when it comes from the whole corpse, miroiv habinyan, the majority of the bone structure, or mirov haminyan, or the number a majority of number of bones. I can actually put Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel together, because Beis Shammai says even 2 or 3 bones, but according to Beis Hillel, he says you need Robinyan. So Beis Shammai Omrim Mishnayim O Mishleisha, 2 or 3 bones. It means O Mishnei Shukayim V'Yarach Echad. How is it possible? Even with 3 bones, namely the 2 shin bones and a thigh bone, then itself won't be Robinyan, but it's Robinyan. That's already a significant amount of bone. So that would already constitute as Robinyan. Says the Mefarish, Gimel Evarim Kebeis Shammai Vehi Behen Roiv Binyanai. Beis Hillel Omer Meroiv Haminyan of Eloi Mishar Evarim, not from other limbs. Harihu Yachol L'Skayim Debri Beis Hillel Kamo. Fine. We'll finish the rest. We'll do this Mefarish. Let's look at the Gemara instead. So O Mishnei Yerchayim V'Shuk Echad, or it's possible that we're talking about 2 thigh bones and one shin bone. Hoyav Roiv Gavohi Shel Adam Migaiva, because the majority of one's height comes from these bones, which is again Robinyan. Ubeis Hillel oimrim minagvia omeroi binyan omeroi minyan hoyel v'yishnan. It's possible it can come pirkei yadayim v'raglayim, from the joints of one's hands and feet. So in other words, you can accomplish Robinyan by even the bones in one's hands and feet, because there's so many of them, even in such a small amount of place. Okay, that's like Gimel Ivarim. That's still considered like 3 limbs if we're dealing with your hands and your feet. Shama Yarmer Mefil Etzem Min Hashedra Oi Min Hagogoylus. Now here's the catch. Shammai says beferish that even one Afil Etzem Min Hashedra, even if it's 1 bone from the spinal column or the Gogoylus. So we see clearly, according to Beis Shammai, that they're not the same, that they're split. So where it says, okay, that's true. Shani Shami de Machmer. Maybe it's only claimed as Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai in general is very strict. So by Beis Shammai, says the Mefarish, to Isbahu Chumr Tfei Mishari Varim. So since he's so strict, okay, so he says that the Shedra or the Gogoyos is Matama. So, but we don't know necessarily what the Chachamim would hold. So, Livsha min not time of the Beis Shammai de Machmer. Maybe the fact that we said the Beis Shammai is strict, Harabanan Adi Ika Shedra Vigo Goyos. So you can learn the other way around. That maybe if Beis Shammai says separate the Shedra and the Gogoyos, must be that the other Shita that's Chaylik holds that they're together. Where it says, Lo, Ad Kan Lo Piga Rabban Aleha de Shammai El Be'etzem Echad. Maybe the only time they argue is regarding 1 bone, the Asimina Shedra Umina Gogoyos, which comes both from the Shedra and the Gogoyos. Avulhecha the Ise Be'ene. We're dealing with the whole spine or the whole skull. Afil Chada Min Hoin. So again, we haven't necessarily established the answer to that question. In fact, we didn't finish question 5. We're not going to see that until tomorrow's daf. So we're actually going to stop there and let us see if we have another question. TA 27. Matai Shedra Mifarekes. When do we say, if you have the Shedra in which it is the spine has detached, when do we say that's Tameya? So we saw in the Gemara that Shedra Shigired Rova Leha Shabbatara Uvekever Afil Mishaveres O Mifarekes Tameya Mimnei Hakever. So we say that even if it is a spinal column that was detached, it will be Tameh by the kever. And the reason we saw in the Mefarish was because that when it is in the kever, it's kamo shlema. It's considered like it is completely intact as one. Ad kan.